Good morning, dear colleagues and guests. Today is the 6th of April 2022, noon sharp. Let me declare open a session of the Dissertation Council for the defense of thesis by Palahan Nattanop for the degree of Candidate of Philology. Academic Specialty 599. Media Communications and Journalism on the theme Propaganda of the Soviet Media in the Kingdom of Thailand during the Cold War. In the order of Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University, Gnorov Alexander Valentinovich, dated the 19th of January 2022, number 239/1, me, Mesonzhnikov Boris Yakovlevich, Doctor of Philology, Professor of the Department of Digital Media Communications of St. Petersburg University, was appointed Chairman of this Dissertation Council. Other members of the Council were appointed with the same order. Let me introduce them to you. Melnik Galina Sergeyevna, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the Department of Digital Media Communications of St. Petersburg University. Tsvetova Natalia Sergeyevna, Doctor of Philology, Associate Professor of the Media Linguistics Department of St. Petersburg University. In the remote access mode, we have the following council members: Labush Nikolai Sergeyevich, Doctor of Political Science, Professor of the Department of International Journalism of St. Petersburg University. Can you see and hear us, Nikolai Sergeyevich? Yes, I can see and hear you very well. Thank you. The answer is yes. Katilenets Yelena Anatolovna, Doctor of History, Professor, Department of Russian History, People's Friendship University of Russia. Elena Anatolovna, can you see and hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you. I beg your pardon. I had some issues with the internet. The answer is positive. Ospanova Aigerim Nuralivna, Doctor of Political Science, Professor, Head of the Regional Studies Department, Gumilov Eurasian National University, Kazakhstan. Aigerim Nuralivna, can you see and hear us? Good morning, dear Chairman. Yes, I can see and hear you. Yes, the answer is yes, thank you. Also, the degree applicant, Palahan Nattanop, is present. Also, the academic supervisor of the applicant, Doctor of Philology, Professor, Head of the Department of History of Journalism of St. Petersburg University, Gromova Ludmila Petrovna. In order to improve the quality of communication, dear colleagues working in the remote access mode, please switch off your microphones. But remember to switch them on when you are given the floor. Let me also inform you that our session is being recorded and broadcast live at St. Petersburg University website. These pictures are being simultaneously translated from Russian to English or from English into Russian. During the live broadcast of the council session, at the moment, an email is currently displayed, to which, during the session, all the listeners may send questions to the applicant and their opinions regarding the thesis and the applicant's speech, the current scientific discussion, and thus take part in the discussion. These questions shall be forwarded to me by our technical support service, and I shall present them during the discussion. Questions should be related strictly to the applicant's speech and the content of his thesis. It's necessary to indicate full name, position, and place of employment of the author of the question. Questions that are not related to the discussion discussion of the thesis, text and assessment of the thesis, as well as unanimous questions, shall not be presented. In accordance with the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, approved by the local regulations of St. Petersburg University, hereinafter referred to as the order, a session shall be considered competent if at least 2/3 of the appointed members are present, but not less than 4 persons. Our council consists of 6 members. All 6 are present, including 3 council members in a remote interactive mode. Audio-visual contact has been established with them. Thus we have the quorum. I invite the Dissertation Council Activity Support Officer to draw up the attendance list. Let me set the following procedure of the session, with a total duration of approximately 2 hours. First, summary report of the chairman about the applicant and documents submitted by the applicant and their compliance with the regulations. Answers to possible questions, approximately 5 minutes. Summary report of the applicant, outlining the key points of his study, approximately 15 minutes. 3. Questions to the applicant strictly regarding his presentation. Answers of the applicant, no more than 5 minutes for all the questions. Presentation of external reviews, if any, speeches of all the council members in turn, with their assessments of the thesis and the applicant's presentation, as well as questions and suggestions to the applicant, approximately 10 minutes for each speaker. 7. The chairman's speech with his assessment of the thesis. Number 8. Answers of the degree applicant to questions and remarks made by the council members, no more than 20 minutes. 9. Open discussion and speeches of the attendees with summaries of their positions and or specific questions and suggestions to the applicant, strictly on the theme of the study. At that, all the speakers are kindly requested to register themselves and introduce themselves, giving their full name before speaking, as well as degree, position and place of employment. 10. Presentation of questions to the applicant received during the scientific discussion, during the live broadcast of the council session at the university website. Please note that written questions, the presentation of which takes over 2 minutes, shall not be presented. 11. Answers of the applicant, not more than 2 minutes per one question. 12. Speech of the thesis supervisor, not more than 3 minutes. 13. Discussion of the council members before open voting of the defense results. During that period, sound shall be switched off. Approximately 5 minutes. Open individual voting. Votes shall be counted by the chairman and the results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. 15. Making decision on awarding or not awarding the degree. And 16. Finally, final closing remarks of the applicant. No more than 5 minutes. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions or objections to this procedure? No. No. No questions, no, and no objections. If there are no objections, let's start the session. First of all, please switch off your mobile phones. Dear Council members working in the remote access mode, please keep your phones on so that we could reach you quickly in case of emergency, in case of some technical issues. Thank you for your attention. Let's start the session. Summary report of the chairman. The thesis by Palahan Nattanop for the degree of Candidate of Philology. Academic Specialty 599, Media Communications and Journalism, on the theme Propaganda of the Soviet Media in the Kingdom of Thailand during the Cold War. Was accepted for defense by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University, dated the 30th of December, number 13246/1. Palahan Nattanop wrote his thesis at St. Petersburg University as a doctoral student. His thesis supervisor is Doctor of Philology, Professor, Head of the Department of History of Journalism at St. Petersburg University, Gromova Ludmila Petrovna. The number of publications which set forth the key results of the thesis according to the enclosed list is 4. In peer-reviewed journals from the list approved by the Ministry of Science and Education of the Russian Federation, 4 publications. All the documents submitted by the applicant according to the information I received from the curator comply with the St. Petersburg University regulations and are kept in the applicant's attestation file. Copies are available from the Dissertation Council Activity Support Department officer who is now present. Before I give the floor to the applicant, I have a question for the council members. Dear council members, do you have any general questions to the applicant, and is it necessary to disclose the entire list of documents submitted by the applicant? No. As I understand, there are no questions. Presentation of the applicant. Please remember, you have 15 minutes. The floor is yours. Palahan Nattanop. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, dear guests, dear friends, my name is Palahan Nattanop, and I'd like to present my PhD thesis on Soviet media propaganda in the Kingdom of Thailand during the Cold War, written under the supervision of Professor Ludmila Gromova. Relevance of the thesis against the background of activities in a number of Western, Russian, international media in the contemporary international propaganda, study of the historical experience of mechanisms of propaganda, especially during the ideological and military conflicts, is very relevant. After the Second World War, a new period of ideological confrontation, the so-called Cold War period, started. A war with ideological conflicts and mediated wars. The Soviet propaganda activities in Thailand were very complex. Located in a strategic region, Thailand was an active ally of the US and supported the anti-communist agenda. In 1960s, after the ideological conflict between the USA and PRC, there was a split in the Communist Party of Thailand as the party's leadership chose a Maoist and at the same an anti-Soviet path. The Soviet media in Thailand had worked alongside alongside the Soviet diplomatic mission since 1948, were forced to operate in a hostile environment, given that Soviet communist ideology was not predominant in Thailand. The main Soviet publication in Thailand, the Soviet Union magazine and other media, were charged with the important task of disseminating and popularizing a positive image of the USSR and Soviet ideology. The aim of my paper is to analyze the propaganda activities of the Soviet Union in Thailand in the ideological struggle of the Cold War period, when the Soviet role in Thailand was not decisive in the ideological struggle between capitalists and communists. To achieve this goal, the following objectives have been defined: to examine the history, status, and characteristics of the ideological struggle of different parties, such as US and Thai government, Communist Party of Thailand, China, Soviet Union, in Thailand during the Cold War, to examine the stages of Soviet propaganda activities in Thailand, to analyze the practice of Soviet propaganda in Thailand, and to determine the significance of Soviet propaganda among the Thai audiences. The object of my study was the Soviet media working for a Thai audience. The subject of the study was Soviet media propaganda activities in Thailand and the influence of Soviet media in the global context of the Cold War period. Hypothesis of my study is that Soviet media successfully carried out their activities despite obstacles from the Thai authorities, capitalist countries, and the Communist Party of Thailand, and achieved their goal in creating a positive image of the Soviet Union by disseminating truthful information about the USSR and promoting the lifestyle of the Soviet people. As a result of studying the history, condition, and characteristics of ideological struggle, we have revealed that there have long been ideas of propaganda or information as a weapon, but the modern concept of propaganda has been actively developed since the early 20th century, when Western scholars began to study the experience of using and spreading information during the First World War and the October Revolution in Russia. According to them, propaganda was a prolonged process of creating a certain image that influenced attitudes. In Soviet Russia, the definition of the essence of propaganda is inevitably connected with communism, although long before that, since the 18th century, Russia already had the experience of information impact due to the constant anti-Russian information campaigns. In the new doctrine, Lenin attached great importance to the press. In his new doctrine, he defined the tasks of the press and its functions, which were reflected in the formula that a newspaper was a propagandist, an agitator, and an organizer. At the same time, Soviet Russia and subsequently the USSR began to develop the propaganda activities abroad, which were successfully developed and severely tested during the Great Patriotic War. At this time, there was an anti-communist sentiment in Thailand due to the rejection of the Russian Revolution and the spread of the communist ideology. Since the 1920s, the communist activities in Thailand were banned, and different political regimes had similar anti-communist policies, and thus, from the first steps of the local branch of Son Inform Bureau in Thailand in 1948, there were regular, consolidated attacks, both by the Thai authorities and Western influence groups. The Thai authorities carried out repeated mass repressions against communists in Thailand after the ideological split in the Communist Party in 1961. Most Thai communist Maoists, backed by China, were also hostile to the Soviet Union. In addition, the anti-Soviet tasks set for local and foreign activists were carried out by disseminating relevant material through the Thai media with technical and material assistance provided by Western countries. The Soviet media in Thailand from 1948 fulfilled their Leninist functions through their own channels, Sovinform Bureau or the Novosti Press Agency, Moscow Radio in Thai, and others. The pages of the main Soviet periodicals in Thailand, the Organization of Soviet Media in Thailand, carried out a propagandist task. They presented the Soviet way of life and the atmosphere of friendship between Russia and Thailand through Soviet publications such as Soviet Union Magazine, Dissertation, Radio in Thai, and even personal channels of Soviet media personalities in Thailand, such as personal column of Udon Tapansota and popular magazine Lalana, etc. The propaganda task of the Soviet media was strongly influenced by the social and political environment in Thailand and the USSR. A limited range of audiences, despite the de facto restriction of the distribution of socialist media in Thailand, actively contacted the editorial board of Soviet Union magazine and Moskovskaya Radio in Thai. The propaganda was carried out on various fronts. These included, first, the high quality of Soviet education, agitated by the Thai authorities and the country's main university, Kin Chulalongkorn University. Second, respectful attitude of Soviet anniversaries, especially the 50th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution and the 100th anniversary of the birth of Vladimir Lenin. Thirdly, friendly image of the Soviet Union and Russia in bilateral relations, which in fact included the imperial period with stories about the ordinary people like Nikolai Miklukha-Maklai and Pyotr Shurovsky, and with no mention of the role of the Romanov family in establishing the warm bilateral relations. And fourthly, the anti-Maoist propaganda campaign, which was a unique setting for the Soviet foreign media. The work of the Soviet media also influenced the accelerated decline of the Communist Party of Thailand, the Maoist Party in Thailand. The organizational work of the Soviet media consisted of rallying some influential communists like Tuit, Pumisak, Kulab, Saipradit, Udon Tapanas, to whom the links of the Thai staff working in the Soviet media organizations led. After the ideological split among the Thai communists, the importance of such work increased, and it began to affect the interests of all social groups in all regions of the country. The influence of such work, despite its socialist orientation, persists to this day, such as the promotion of a positive image of Russia in the role of preserving the independence of Thailand during the colonization period. The result of the study is that throughout the Cold War period, the Soviet media in Thailand successfully conducted its activities according to the Leninist doctrine, despite various obstacles set by the Thai capitalist authorities and, after 1961, the Communist Party of Thailand. The Leninist media doctrine became complicated along with the modern definition of propaganda as a long-term process of image making and influencing the public relations in the West. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Soviet Union successfully conducted its overseas information campaign, especially during the Great Patriotic War, and began working among the Thai audiences from 1948 during the Cold War amid a hostile and anti-Soviet environment in Thailand. The result of this activity still lingers in Thailand, as the Thais still have a good opinion of Russia. The results of this research has been published in the following journals and presented at the following scientific conferences. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Is that all? Dear Council members, do you have any questions to the applicant strictly related to his presentation outlining the key points or the content of his thesis? No. I have no questions. No. Now see, there are no questions. Question from an attendee. Yes, please. Please. Please take the microphone and remember to turn it on. Thank you very much for allowing me to ask this question. Please let us know. What do you think? If Soviet media influence is still present today, and if Soviet media influence is still present in Thailand? Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. In fact, the result of Soviet media is still present in Thailand, and is still the positive image of Russia still persists in preservation of Thailand's independence. This is a direct consequence of the work of Soviet media in Thailand, because during the the Cold War period, it was almost impossible to mention USSR. The only effort aimed at preservation of this positive image was made by Soviet media, such as Soviet Union magazine and Moskovskaya Radio in Thai language. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have no more questions at this point. Let us proceed to speeches of the Dissertation Council and presentation the reviews. The applicant may answer each reviewer individually, or he may take all the questions in the end after all the reviews have been presented. It's up to the chairman. I suggest that it's best that you answer each reviewer individually. Is that possible? Do you mind? No. Well, first let me present external reviews that we received from Punkachon Trisilna, Associate Professor of Department of Comparative Literature, Faculty of Arts, Chulalongkorn University, Department of Comparative Literature. Here's the review. Punkachon Trisilna says the image, the positive image of Russia. This is an academic study. Palahan has analyzed successful work of Soviet media in Thailand. This study contributes knowledge of Soviet media the applicant has gathered unique material, including archive materials from propaganda sources, journals and magazines, books and interviews. The entire review has been published at the university website. If anybody is interested, it's available. The review is available, and we received one more review from Natchivan Nekrathanakulpat, candidate of Pedagogical Sciences, Associate Professor of the Department of Pedagogy of Department of Philology of Southeast Asia. The author says that Palahan's research made interesting information available, which it is related not only to the media development, but the relations between USSR and Thailand over that period. The author emphasizes that the author provides invaluable evidence of some forgotten issues of cooperation of the two states, which are not known to the contemporaries. Palahan's work is based on analysis of the archive materials, memoirs, propaganda materials and other documents in Russian and Thai languages. From the point of, as a teacher of Thai, this work also can be used in teaching the Russian and Thai languages. Palahan, with pleasure, shares his achievements, talking to other interested persons about his work in accessible and interesting format. All that allows me to conclude that the study of the propaganda activities of Soviet media in Thailand during the Cold War is a piece of research which is independent, complete and valuable, and the author Nattanop Palahan deserves awarding the degree of candidate of philology. Signed, signature and seal. As you can see, both reviews are positive, and I suggest we proceed to speeches of the council members. Let's proceed to speeches of the council members, since all the reviews were published at St. Petersburg University website. For preliminary review, I suggest we read only the key points. Focus on questions and remarks to the applicant. Do council members have any objections to that? No. Thank you. So the order could be okay. So let's stick to this order. First, let me give the floor to Professor Labush Nikolai Sergeyevich, who is working in the remote interactive mode. Nikolai Sergeyevich, welcome. I'd like to apologize. Maybe. I beg your pardon because I'm unwell, but I'll try to communicate the few points of my review. First, I'd like to say that the topic is highly relevant. It's relevant to the current events, the confrontation between Russia and the West, and the open economic and war. So one of the key parties of Palahan Nattanop is connected with historical rehabilitation of propaganda as an opportunity to interact and exchange opinions and views without open confrontation and open lies typical of information wars. The study demonstrates the in-depth knowledge of this subject The author covers all the important issues, relevance, novelty, practical significance, and the method of the study. The study is very complete, and the theoretical foundations are very strong, dealing with works of Russian and Thai scientists. At the same time, the researcher found important issues about efficient propaganda and the mechanisms to form the positive image of USSR during the Cold War. At the same time, the author, the main hypothesis of the study, set by the author, and confirms it by solving the tasks he set himself and achieving the goals he set. All the colleagues know that the work starts with introduction, 3 chapters, and conclusion, list of references. And I'm not, but the most interesting chapters, chapter 3, propaganda of Soviet media and its influence in Thailand. First 2 chapters described the political and economic background for propaganda activities of Soviet media, and as we can conclude, the conditions were very unfavorable. If we look at Soviet media in Thailand, the author focuses on propaganda and other activities of Soviet ideological apparatus abroad, and analyzes not only media but also memoirs of journalists, interviews with culture figures, and reports of diplomats, USSR diplomats, Thai and US officials. It's interesting, should mention, unique materials put in scientific circulation the author uses to study these processes. The material of chapter 3 answers questions asked that the researcher has set himself, and the key to understanding how propaganda was performed in Thailand is done through analysis of the key propaganda tool in that country, the Soviet Union magazine, and also Moskovskaya radio channel. The study analyzes data on how the magazine, 144 issues, how different social groups and different texts addressing them were published. So only a small part of the text is dedicated to politics and communist propaganda. Most texts are about culture, science, sports, education, etc. And such variety provided truthful information accessible to the Thai audience. Another strong point of Palahan's work is employing wide empirical foundation, including various publications found by the applicant in university libraries of Thailand, the National Archive of Thailand, of course, state archives of Russia, and Russian National Library, but of course interviews with Thai and Soviet journalists who took part in events on the study. The text of the thesis demonstrates wide knowledge of the applicant, who uses sources in Russian, Thai, and English languages. Regulatory documents, the novelty of the study is in the fact that it's based on sources that reflect bipolar opinions and political practices. All the provisions submitted for defense are coherent and well validated. I assume that this study contributes the results obtained earlier in the study of political propaganda and demonstrates the controversial trends and factors that influence the propaganda mechanisms subject to external circumstances. And this aspect is especially important in the current situation, where Russia, on the one hand, is attacked and internal ideological contradictions. The nature of this study leads to some questions, and though of course Palahan certainly will continue his research, I'd like to make some suggestions and give some comments of methodological nature. First of all, this applies to such categories and phenomena as information, newspaper, agitation. Here, in my opinion, all these terms should be defined, and the relations between them should be explored as the methodological foundation of the study. Information, newspaper, mass media, propaganda, agitation activities. Next, in our opinion, the author overuses concept and conceptual approach. I'm not going to give any examples from the text here, but if you try to employ the conceptual approach, you have to provide a comprehensive vision, content, and relations between phenomena. And if the chapter claims to take a look to employ conceptual approach, a concept should be present, and some positions presented in the thesis require further clarification. So of course the author knows how propaganda is different from agitation, but is not clear why in some places same activities are classified as propaganda, the ambassador speech, for example, and in other places as agitation work. Also, there are some minor formal drawbacks, so I don't expect the applicant to answer, but I expect him to pay attention to this. For example, when the goal of the study is set, it should be more specific, and there are some repetitions of some historical events. Some conclusions in some chapters should be more clearly defined, and also is necessary to pay more attention to political assessment. At the same time, page 65, the author quotes Prime Minister of Thailand, who called all people to be careful and attentive because of spread of the communist ideology. Here also he explains his understanding of communist and its destructive force for the Thai society. And in page 66, the author says that the fears of Prime Minister were justified. How come? After the democratic revolution of 1932, the officials used the communist motive as criticism of their political opponents. So this position should be explained. These drawbacks are not critical for the positive assessment, and in general, the thesis by Palahan Nattanop can be classified as a work that addresses a relevant scientific task and describes as necessary to improve mechanisms of foreign propaganda in intensified confrontation during the information war. The work is written independently. It has unity, good logic, and coherence, contains new results submitted for public defense. The thesis by Palahan Nattanop on the theme Propaganda Activities of Soviet Media in the Kingdom of Thailand during the Cold War complies with the key requirements set by the order on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the applicant Palahan Nattanop deserves awarding the degree of candidate of Political Sciences, specialty 599, Media Communications and Journalism. Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. My signature, date, and name. Thank you for your attention. Nikolai Sergeyevich, thank you very much. We'll hear all the answers. I suggest we listen to all the answers. Let me give the floor to Galina Sergeyevna Melnik. Dear colleagues, I agree with all the assessments given, and even with the brave statement that the thesis is excellent. I agree. Indeed, the relevance of the work has several points after World War II. Could I please thank you? Thailand was a site of confrontation between two superpowers during the Cold War period. They paid attention to the expansion in Southeast Asia, and it was accompanied by civil wars and armed conflicts. We all know that, we all understand that, and I agree with Nikolai Sergeyevich's thesis idea to revive the propaganda instruments in the modern world as instruments to fight for values and ideals, souls and minds of the modern man. The thesis deals with a number of important tasks, such as evolution of ideological struggle, Communist Party and USSR during the Cold War, analyzes the practice of Soviet propaganda in Thailand and stages of its implementation, identified significance of Thai propaganda among Thai audiences, identified internal and foreign structures involved in propaganda activities in the country. Speaking of the object and subject of the study, the goal is set, though very broadly, but in the correct way. The object is Soviet media working for the Thai audiences. It's propaganda activities of Soviet media in Thailand during the Cold War. Methods of the study, technological data processing, a historical comparative method are sufficient to address this task. Novelty of the thesis and personal contribution of the author are in the following. The author has included lots of previously unknown data, characterize activities of Soviet media in Thailand. Sovinform Bureau, Soviet Union magazine, demonstrates forms of organization of information activity, the change of ideology, Buddhism, Maoism, Marxism, Leninism, Trotskyism, explains the author's content, political propaganda on the basis of critical analysis of literature and sources in various languages, identified and analyzed new forms of promotion of Soviet ideology abroad, which set the system of Soviet propaganda, etc. The benefits of the thesis is in the use of great number of empirical data and archived documents put in a system. Annexes provide illustrations. The study is based on materials from the Russian Social-Political History Archive and other sources. Obvious advantage of the work is its focus on works which represent different ideologies and political positions, and this is confirmed throughout the thesis. So the author remains an impartial researcher. We should emphasize the position of the author. Another obvious advantage is coverage of a long historical period. Demonstration of the key points, such as the visit of Nicholas II to Thailand in 1891, ideological split with China, the colonial period, and the work of the Communist University, International Lenin School, which educated foreign revolutionary activists, including Ho Chi Minh, former leader of China, etc. Empirical base includes publications published by APN in Thailand, and it states in detail where everything was published. This is proper analytical analysis. The theoretical significance lies in the fact that the key provisions of the work, the methods and specific results can be used in further research dedicated to communicative aspects of interaction of the two states. The methodology is highly credible, demonstrates credibility of results, careful selection and processing of data. The author has analyzed history of Soviet journalism and propaganda in the context of international information struggle, as well as the key political documents defining participation of media in propaganda activities during the Cold War period. The practical significance lies in the fact that achieved results can be used as the basics of courses in educational courses, as well as the state policy of Thailand in the current circumstances. The main materials and results of the thesis were published in 4 articles, and despite the overall positive impression, let me mention some minor drawbacks. I think modern books and articles on the role of propaganda and counter-propaganda are not sufficiently presented, especially in relation to historical past and technologies. The work would look more substantial if included works on mobilization technologies and strategic communications written by professors of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, Chkasova, Bykov, Gavr, Masonjnikov, Filatov, and others. The methodological part could be strengthened with works of our linguists. References and in the introduction, I couldn't find provisions submitted for defense. Only the hypothesis was presented, and the hypothesis has been validated. These comments are not critical and do not affect the overall positive impression of Palahan Nattanop's work, and do not reduce the scientific and practical significance of the results achieved by the thesis by Palahan Nattanop on the theme Propaganda Activities of Soviet Media in the Kingdom of Thailand during the Cold War period, complying with the key requirements set by the order on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the applicant, Palahan Nattanop, deserves awarding the degree of Candidate of Philology, Specialty 599. Media Communications and Journalism, Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. That's all. Thank you very much, Galina Sergeyevna. Now let me give the floor to Tsvetova Natalia Sergeyevna. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Relevance of this study dedicated to propaganda activities in the modern situation where, I'm quoting, the anti-Russian propaganda on behalf of Western media became the mainstream of international political agenda, is beyond any doubt, as was mentioned already. Additional evidence of relevance of the thesis is its historical and journalistic nature. Local and long-gone material makes us think about the well-known mechanisms of presence in national media in a complex international situation. Scientific novelty, as stated in the introduction, is explained by the author's focus on presentation of various ideological and political opinions, which affect evaluation of Soviet media activities. Speaking of practical significance of this study, I'd like to emphasize not so much its didactic potential as the applicant describes in the beginning, but the opportunity to use the conclusions and observations in formative professional activities of modern journalists, participants of the information wars. Besides, it's necessary to observe that the scientific concept is based on works of distinguished Russian scholars. Though, of course, Alexander said that the list of references maybe is insufficient, but it is in a way compensated by the Russian scientific discourse is complemented with works of Thai specialists, and the list is rather impressive. As for the empirical basis, I will not talk about that, as this was mentioned by the authors of the reviews, the additional external reviews, and the significant empirical foundations made. The result of the work, section 1-2, which provides vast historical material on emergence of the Soviet propaganda system overseas. The main achievement of the author, in our opinion, is a coherent, logically perfect, in accordance with the Russian tradition research, which starts with analysis of the initial phase of the propaganda concept and is concluded with the analysis of the polyfunctional status. In the second chapter of the thesis, Anti-Soviet Policies in the Asian Information Policy of Thailand provides objective context in which Soviet journalists had to work since their first days in the kingdom. The chapter dedicated to the activity of the information services of U.S. established in 1954 in Thailand, including specific influences based aimed at creation the positive image of using the educational themes by the French and the British propaganda, etc. So a very powerful context, very strong context for the scientific concept has been created. Chapter 3 is especially important, propaganda of Soviet mass media and its influence in Thailand, which analyzes the key areas of Soviet propaganda in Thailand during the Cold War. This work was conducted in very difficult circumstances. These challenges were of systematic nature, explained by Thai efforts of Thai leadership to prevent the spread of communist ideology in the region. The third chapter presents strong historical context as a third paragraph, where the author speaks about the work of Soviet journalists. The third chapter was of most interest for me, which because of that I had some serious expectations regarding paragraphs connected with media involvement. Should say that in the theoretical part, these fragments were well advertised. The author identified two main methods to create such an image: truthful information and presentation of attractive lifestyle of Soviet people, as said by Nikolai Sergeyevich. So the author about specific means and methods, but also this part of the thesis, in my point, requires some clarifications, mostly on the basis of what makes the author claim so what were the foundations for propaganda instruments, and is included in a chapter dedicated to propaganda campaigns. Can the author comment as only a small part of the texts I'm quoting published in the Soviet Union magazine were dedicated to politics and communist propaganda. Most texts were about culture, sports, and education. Such diversity provided truthful information. And finally, while included in section 3.3, dedicated to information. I'm talking about the genre here. As for the comments, they are mostly of technical nature and can by no way affect the overall assessment of the thesis. So let me just identify. So there are some repetitions, speech inaccuracies, and maybe too straightforward connections between certain facts and events. But such examples are few, and these are isolated cases. I'd like to emphasize that our comments can by no way influence the overall course of our discussion, and we get questions when discussing truly unique scientific concepts and approaches. Significance of the thesis by Palahan Nattanop is validated by the fact that the thesis by Palahan Nattanop on the theme propaganda activities of Soviet media in the Kingdom of Thailand during the Cold War period complies with the main regulations set by the order dated the 19th of November 2021 on order of awarding academic degrees at Petersburg University, and the applicant Palahan Nattanop deserves awarding the degree of Candidate of Philology, Specialty 599, Media Communications and Journalism. Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Natalia Sergeyevna, thank you very much. Let us continue. Let's give the floor to Elena Anatolovna Katilenets. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. Dear Chairman, dear colleagues, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that the applicant Nattanop Palahan touches upon a highly relevant topic, the image of a country abroad, and he deals with this issue during the Cold War period. As we all know perfectly well, exactly during this period, all the tools, all the technologies and means of information wars have been tested, which were used during later periods. So I think he deals with a very important subject which he should explore in his further studies. We know perfectly well that during the Cold War there was an acute ideological confrontation between USSR and the US, and we know that Thailand, the Kingdom of Thailand, supported the US. And exactly in this country, Soviet mass media start their propaganda to create an image. But their aim was not only, as the author demonstrates, not only dissemination of the socialist ideology or Soviet lifestyle, but, as the author demonstrates, mass media tried to weaken the Chinese influence on Thai left or communist organizations. So indeed, these two important tasks set by of the Soviet media were extremely complex, and by analyzing the methods Soviet Union used to address these two tasks. Palahan describes everything very well. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that the applicant analyzes his task that lies between several sciences. This work is interdisciplinary, and since I am a historian, and so that's my basic education. So he solves many historical tasks. He analyzes many historical documents, which is a unique case for a thesis in philology. Note what a wide range of archive documents is analyzed. This is I won't list all the archives that he uses, but that list is both surprising and makes you admire, especially as a historian working on propaganda issues. So these documents that he has studied or introduced into scientific discourse for the first time, which is extremely important for us. Besides, he uses many documents from the Russian National Library, Center of Oriental Languages Literature. Also, take a look at the next group of sources, Soviet media materials in Thailand. That's a huge amount of sources explored by the applicant. Enormous work he has performed to explore materials of Sovinformbureau, Soviet Union magazine in Thai language, and huge number of issues of these magazines. For us as researchers, as Russians, it's extremely important that to learn of some unknown documents the author found in Thailand, in Bangkok. I won't list these divisions of the National Development Institute of Thailand, which he has studied. He also adds, on top of that, he interviews with former employees who worked in Moskovskaya Radio in Thai. So these live evidences translated into Russian, they contribute and make the picture very impressive. That doesn't mean everything is perfect, and I have no comments, but this enormous material between history, linguistics and philology is really amazing. So in my opinion, this work certainly is unique. Not to mention that such studies have not been conducted before. So the work, if propaganda, Soviet propaganda, was mostly explored in China, but as for Thailand, no researchers explored this topic before, and well, this is where the novelty of the work is. So that's what I would like to emphasize. First of all, also please note that his study connected with propaganda issues conducted by Palahan, he talks about different meanings of this phrase for Soviet and Thai researchers. The understanding, when we start to analyze, we can not always agree about the terms, and here Palahan manages to explain the terms, what movements, what dynamics it contained, and I think that is very important. Another important issue to which I'd like to draw your attention: Palahan very carefully divines Soviet and American propaganda and demonstrates the foundations of both. And I think in that is certainly a major advantage of this work. Besides, also what I wanted to say, he demonstrates the difficulties of Soviet propaganda when translating different texts in Thai. So this is interdisciplinary work that lies between different sciences, and it proves how difficult it was to translate different texts, to put in a specific information field, look at English text or Thai texts. For me, it's important that the applicant has conducted comparative analysis of the covers. You see, the visual content is also extremely important, and the fact that he has analyzed the covers, I think that is extremely important, because the visual material is 2-3 times more influential as compared with the verbal material, especially important for the young people, which the author emphasizes in his work. So this impressive material presented by the applicant is extremely valuable for our researchers, because it provides us with a flashlight to cover similar stories in other countries. Palahan has not set himself the task to explore all issues of mass media of USSR in Thailand during the Cold War period, but he demonstrated what methods were used, what are the features of this propaganda. That's what I mean, that he gave us a flashlight, which we can use to explore similar cases in other states. Speaking of these advantages of the applicant's work, of course, I'd like to emphasize, to mention maybe some recommendations that could be useful if he wanted to continue his research. In my opinion, here's what is missing: some statistics or some results. How or what did we get, and can it be counted or calculated or measured with statistical data in social sciences, maybe population surveys, studies of the Union, of Soviet Union, if people actually wanted to travel to USSR, if they wanted to buy books by Russian authors in Thai. So how effective such propaganda was. So indeed, the author demonstrated that it worked not only to create a positive image of USSR, but also against China. But where can we see if our propaganda was effective? So it would be good to check the effectiveness. So I don't know. I'd like to get an answer from the applicant. And another important issue, in my opinion, I would like to see the author's view, the author's position, the author's conclusions. Maybe, or perhaps, Palahan specially avoided this. Is that possible? Yes, it's partly possible, but in this work, the author's opinion, the author's conclusion are missing. I'm not talking about a unique concept. That was not his task, but it's the author's personal opinion. The author, perhaps the author could outline his position when answering questions. And the part on history provided me with some valuable resources. I'm working with history issues, and the fact that he mentioned such interesting sources this is very interesting. Thank you very much. I forgot to mention that. And in addition to some drawbacks, I'd like to say that some wordings, there are some typos, some repetitions, so some editing. The text needs some editing, but maybe I'm being too critical because Russian is not the author's native language, but these comments are merely recommendations, and they do not affect the overall positive assessment of the work and its significance. The thesis by Nattanop Palahan on propaganda activities of Soviet media in the Kingdom of Thailand during the Cold War period complies with the main regulations set by the order dated the 19th of November 2021, number 11181/1 on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the applicant Nattanop Palahan deserves, in my opinion, awarding the degree of Candidate of Philology, specialty 599, Media Communications and Journalism. Articles 9 and 11 of the order has not been violated by the author. Kotelenets Elena Anatolovna, Doctor of History, Professor of the History, Department of Russian History, Russian University of People's Friendship. Signature and seal. Thank you, Elena Anatolovna. Now let me give the floor to Ospanova Айгерим Нуралиевна.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Добрый день, уважаемый председатель. Разрешите представить вашему вниманию.
Hello, dear colleagues. Let me present my review. Palahan Nattanop's thesis, Propaganda of the Soviets, the Kingdom of Thailand during the Cold War period, submitted for procurement of the candidate's degree in media communications and journalism. All our reviews have been published at the university website, so I'll just focus on the key points. Propaganda of Soviet media has its communist propaganda was based on scientific ideology that reflected the interests of working class, being the main weapon in the creation of the new society and historical mission. Communist propaganda aimed to arm the working class with knowledge about the society development and make it a conscientious participant in revolutionary changes. Soviet media propaganda never communicated false information or non-existent facts, unlike the modern media where facts can later be denied. During the Cold War, propagandist activity of Soviet media, such as Soviet Union magazine in Thai, Moskovskaya Radio in Thai, and Novosti, was very complex but very effective. Soviet media became an important tool in promotion of the positive image of USSR in Thailand. And here, I'd like to say that the thesis is well structured and logical. Palahan Nattanop demonstrates knowledge of various works in this subject. In his study, this field has not been studied before. The author notes that against Soviet Thai aristocrats were against Soviet propaganda. This position was connected with personal ideological reasons. The role of Nicholas II in preservation of independence of Thailand during the colonial period was very significant. In his work, the author uses not only the Soviet studies but contemporary studies as well in Russian and post-Soviet space. For the first time, we see a complex study of activities of Soviet media in Thailand based on sources and studies that reflect various ideological and political positions. As was mentioned already, indeed, the author uses lots of many materials, and it's important that the author uses archives. And also, the author uses various methods such as analysis, comparison, and this thesis offers comprehensive approach in the study, which includes historical and systematic approaches. In conclusion, the author concludes that despite all the obstacles and difficulties, the Soviet propaganda in Thailand was efficient. It used all the possible channels and methods to make it more efficient. Propaganda was conducted via periodic media such as Soviet Union and the Moscowskaya Radio, as well as other communication channels. At the same time, I have some questions for the author. If these communication channels are still active, and what's the image of contemporary Russia in Thailand? The thesis by Palahan on the propaganda of Soviets in the Kingdom of Thailand during the Cold War period corresponds to the main requirements set by the order dated the 19th of November 2021, number 11181/1 on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the applicant Palahan Nattanop deserves awarding a degree of philology, specialty 599, media communications and journalism. Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Doctor of Political Sciences, Aspanova. Thank you. Thank you. Aygerim Nuralivna. Now, let me read my review. At the moment, political propaganda, especially in the national historical aspects, got special significance, even of humanitarian nature today. Is extremely important, and of course, we may definitely talk about the scientific work conducted by Palahan Nattanop as a work that is extremely relevant. The author looks at the fundamental aspects of the propaganda theory to interpret the material and pays attention to the various aspects of Russian media. The thesis by Palahan Nattanop has clear structure, which is logical and needed for in-depth study of the set tasks. One of the reasons of these events is that Russian media sometimes neglected the unique nature of their audiences, as the author says, and that's why the observations of the author of some national features of Thai mentality manifested in some political events. For example, in the history of Thailand, in 1992, Thai citizens were all remained passive, and the counter-propaganda activities performed by the Thai government, Communist Party of Thailand, and other forces representing foreign and capitalist states. The author uses Thailand an example which describes a fairly isolated region of demonstrates a period of the struggle of the Thai people for their independence, ability to make independent decisions. It's noteworthy that the Kingdom of Thailand, as the author says describes in detail, is the only state in Southeast Asia that managed to keep its independence from France and UK, while other states of this region became colonies with sometimes dramatic consequences. The thesis by Palahan Nattanop deserves positive assessment as an independent, unique study, unique work conducted without any doubt, dedicated to a highly relevant topic, and the work certainly has great scientific significance, especially if we think about novelty and unique conclusions to which the author arrives. The empirical material of the thesis has been tested during presentations the author made at seminars and in scientific journals. The thesis by Palahan Nattanop is characterized has novelty, composition, use of substantial scientific base. Yet, I'd like to say that the thesis has certain drawbacks. Thus, for example, the topic of the study, defined as propaganda of Soviet media in Thailand during the Cold War period, but the author explores, and he does it in a very substantial way, also American propaganda, so which could be included in the title of the work, but I think the thesis complies with requirements set to applied to works in philology. So it would be interesting to conduct discourse analysis. For example, the author talks about the new trends in the work of Novosti news agency aimed at Thailand, page 126. The use of original text and their analysis would be very relevant. There are also some grammar mistakes, but that do not reduce the overall very favorable impression of the thesis. The thesis by Palahan Nattanop on propaganda activities of Soviet mass media in the Kingdom of Thailand during the Cold War period corresponds to the key requirements set by the order dated the 19th of November 2021, number 11181/1 on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the applicant, Palahan Nattanop, deserves awarding the degree of Candidate of Philology, Specialty 599, Media Communications and Journalism. Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the author. And conclusion, Chairman of the Dissertation Council, Professor Misonjnikov. Dear colleagues, let's give the floor to Palahan Nattanop and let him answer questions asked by the council members. Dear council members, thank you very much for such detailed reviews let me answer your critical remarks and questions. Dear Boris Yakovlevich, I am very grateful for noting the positive aspects of my work, and I am particularly pleased that you drew attention to the historical context of my research, in which I have sought to present development in broader contexts. Therefore, I have considered different actors in the ideological confrontation and have sought to show the American, English, French, and Thai view of the ideological struggle in Thailand through the activities of their media. I agree with your view that in this way I have distanced myself somewhat from the designated topic activities of the Soviet media. However, the analysis of other countries' involvement in Thailand's political life appears very important to me for understanding the conditions and dynamics. Still, the main part of the study is devoted to the work of the Soviet media. I understand your just comments about the language. Yes, indeed, and other members of the Council also made the same comment. There is room for improvement. Dear Elena Anatolievna, you are right that not all issues have been fully addressed. And, of course, I absolutely agree that a sociological survey or addition of sociological data would be very useful. However, according to reports, it's difficult to determine the general picture of attitudes of the local Thai people. The reason is that during the Cold War, a positive view of communism in Thailand was practically forbidden by the Anti-Communist Act of 1952. So, it was impossible to conduct any survey on this subject. Even the mere dissemination of information about the Soviet Union was quickly suppressed. I wrote about this, and I gave some examples with the change. For example, on page 140, I gave information about the visit of Nikolai Ryzhkov's visit to Thailand and Soviet media's coverage of this visit. A visit of such a high-ranking member of the Soviet leadership in pro-American Thailand was almost impossible before the perestroika period. Until then, visits were only one-sided. Only Thai prime ministers could visit Russia for political purposes. Such a visit was a sign of warming bilateral relations on which Soviet media worked constantly. Thank you again. Dear Natalia Sergeyevna, thank you for such careful reading, for your feedback and suggestions. I tried did my best to provide full picture of propaganda of Soviet media and to show why foreign Soviet media started, what they did in Thailand, and what difficulties they encountered during the long period of their existence, and how the political conditions affected their work. In my study of this subject, I try to draw as much as possible on the Russian academic tradition of research, and I'm very glad you've noticed that. As for your comment about the interaction of methods, we use the propaganda. So propaganda means the dissemination of truthful information about the USSR. I have it on page 133. So I put the analysis of covers which reflected the life of the peoples of the USSR, were most suitable for dissemination of truthful information about the USSR under propaganda work and materials about agitation for establishing good bilateral relations, which were almost all materials taken from the pre-Soviet period, which are more suitable for active agitation under propaganda work. I thank you for your attention. Dear Aigerim Nuraliyevna, your opinion is extremely important. The Soviet media. Thank you very much for your feedback. And in response to your question about the modern Russian channels in Thailand, and I'd like to say that U.S. bilateral relations between Russia and Thailand are actively developing. And I think that between Russia and Thailand is not only in the sphere of tourism. Russian media also provide diverse information about Russia. Media cooperation is also development. On the 21st of March this year, 2 weeks ago, a meeting between representative of the 5th military channel of Thailand with the ambassador of Russia and representatives of Russian media took place. And according to the official information, the parties described cooperation with Russian partners, coverage of international news and events in the Thai media. So the Russian media in Thailand are very active, and the relations between Russia and Thailand media are developing, and a separate thesis can be written about the current relations between Russia and Thailand, but that was not my task in this thesis. But in this work I gave an opinion of an opinion leader. On page 160 there is a quote of Prime Minister General Prayut Chan-o-cha that Russia is a true friend of Thailand. This image was created by many Thais thanks to the work of APN, which reminded in its material about Russia's role in preserving Thailand's independence during colonialism in Asia, and systematically formed a positive image of Russia in the Thai society. However, I understand that your question arises because the specific sociological survey is absent, which I have already mentioned in my response, and I'll be happy to think about that in my further research. Thank you very much again. Dear Galina Sergeyevna, thank you for your feedback and suggestions. I used your monograph, Psychology of Mass Communication, when writing the theoretical part of the paper, but I agree that we need to add literature on the role of propaganda and counter-propaganda in shaping the people's worldview and on the techniques of influence. Your comments are very useful for my further work in the study of propaganda and its impact on the society. You are right, it's my omission that I have not highlighted the defense submitted for defense, though identified it in the work and presented as a conclusion. I'm quoting: the activity of the Soviet media in Thailand, which was implemented in accordance with Lenin's concept of the press on propaganda, activism and organizational functions, can be recognized as very successful. I used all the channels and methods possible in those conditions to make the work most effective. Propaganda was carried out both through periodical media, such as the Soviet Union magazine and Moskovskaya Radio, and other communication channels. As a result of these activities, a positive image of Russia has emerged in Thailand. But I cannot but agree that improving my knowledge of Russian, which will open up new horizons for me of history, journalism, and generally, is very important. And I think I'll continue learning Russian all my life. Thank you. This is my main work. Thank you very much. Dear Nikolai Sergeyevich, I'm very grateful for your attention, for your valuable suggestions and comments, especially in the methodological section. You are right that the paper should have been clear in defining the terms, especially the term propaganda. Here I view propaganda as a set of systems of sustained mass persuasion. In my understanding of the presence of propaganda, I have tried to take into account various definitions, including your recent monograph, Mediatizations of Extreme Form of the Political War, Revolution, Terrorism. In addition, referring to the evolution of the concepts of propaganda, I have also tried to show the difference in national historical approaches. Apparently, I have not fully succeeded to do this on the theoretical level. In Chapter 3, the analysis of the Soviet media processes in Thailand uses the words propaganda, activism, and organization as strands of Soviet media activity under the Leninist doctrine. I have examined this practical experience of propaganda and activism activities through specific examples and in disseminating positive information about life in the Soviet Union, and telling memorable dates such as the celebration of the 50th anniversary of USSR in anti-Maoist campaigns, in inviting the young people to study in the USSR, and other examples. By mentioning on pages 159-160 the positive opinion of the Thai Prime Minister and at the same time the Thai Defense Minister about the friendship with Russia, we wanted to show the result which has been achieved in bilateral relations, including through the work of the APN in Thailand. And the modern cooperation is developing on the same basis. As mentioned, on the 21st of March, the director of the 5th Military TV channel, which is very popular among the pro-government Thais, met with the Russian ambassador. It should be noted that a large proportion of Thais are pro-Russian, and it seems that cooperation with the pro-government media, the Thai military TV channel, and the Russian media that already exists in Thailand will continue. And once again, Nikolai Sergeyevich, thank you for your in-depth analysis of my work, which will certainly be useful to me in my further research of these problems. Dear Natchivan, dear Trisulpa, thank you for your attention and considerations on my thesis. I'm very pleased that you, Natchivan, a specialist in pedagogy, see the significance of this work in the cultural educational field as well. I'm also very grateful and proud that Thailand's leading specialist in literary studies, associate member of the Academy of Sciences of Thailand, has commended my work for its historical and literary relevance. This is all the more valuable as she knows well almost all the Thai cultural figures mentioned in my thesis. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, your opinions, the opinions of leading scientists, your assessment of my work is very important and useful to me, and I am sincerely grateful to all of you for your comments, advice, and suggestions for further research on this topic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear council members, are you satisfied with Palahan Nattanop's answers to your questions? Yes, we are. Yes. I have a very small comment. He has lots of supporters here, mostly of our doctoral students. There are our lecturers have personal pages, and here, starting with 2022, already a lot has been written, not only about propaganda, but I'd like to inform your supporters of that. Thank you for the intellectual treat you have provided to us today, and so we will develop in the future. Thank you, Galina Sergeyevna. Questions? We have not received any questions as far as I know, as far as I understand. Now, I'd like to give the floor to the thesis supervisor, Professor Ludmila Petrovna Gromova. Dear colleagues, a lot has been said, many useful things mentioned, and I am very happy to see all our colleagues present here in person or in the remote mode, and think after your speeches the author has a lot to think about, because he's motivated to work on this subject in the future. As the thesis supervisor, I cannot assess the thesis itself, but let me tell you something about the author with whom I have worked all these years, and that was a pleasure. The thesis by Nattanop Palahan between the period of 2018-2021, so he graduated last year, postdoctoral student. Before that, he graduated the bachelor's course in Thailand, completed the master's course in St. Petersburg University in international journalism, and the sphere of his scientific interest is the history of relations between Thailand and Russia before the revolution, dynamics and transformation of these relations after the revolution, and already he's making he's studying the modern period. Of course, the key issue is the work of his thesis, the work of Soviet media during the Cold War period. The theme of his study, Soviet propaganda in the Kingdom of Thailand during the Cold War period, is dedicated to the unknown pages of APN Moskovskaya Radio in the second half of the 20th century. Good command of the history of foreign relations and the mechanisms of propaganda allowed him, the author, the applicant, to explore the subject from different angles and in its historical dynamics. The researcher is characterized by careful approach, knowledge of analytical work, creative thinking. The study of Nattanop Palahan is based on the study of archive materials, memoirs of the participants, and other sources connected with the work of Soviet media in Thailand. For the first time, the author put into scientific circulation some documents that have not been published before from archives of Moscow, Thailand, Bangkok, interviews with journalists who worked at Moskovskaya Radio and APN, their personal archives. And here I must say that the applicant was and we were very lucky in this cooperation that the main work to collect was conducted before the pandemic. The author spent the last 2 years in Thailand, and of course he could not get access to this material. Palahan was an active participant of conferences in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Tomsk, published his articles in national, international journals, and along with that, he organized various activities himself. For example, last year at St. Petersburg University, Thai readings were conducted, and along with Thai language, the applicant speaks English and Russian, and writes and reads articles and edits scientific works in these languages. Because of good humanitarian training, Nattanop Palahan taught the Thai language and other disciplines to bachelors of the School of Oriental Studies of St. Petersburg University and the Classical Oriental Studies Institute. I'd like to mention his professional approach to planning his work, and in that sense, working with him was easy for me. Obviously, that's because of his teaching experiences. This was evidenced in the careful study of literature, careful preparation of presentations, and his teaching practice. The applicant tried to use the knowledge he acquired. The language he used when teaching students enabled him to explore various media practices. The course in Russian journalism, which he used to prepare for seminars in the course of his pedagogical practice, was directly related to the study of the topic of Palahan's research activity of Russian media agencies in Thailand during the Cold War period. Thus, in his own practice, the applicant managed to use both the scientific and pedagogical competencies he acquired being a student of the university. As a result, the results of his study have been tested at various conferences and in articles. He made 10 presentations at 10 international conferences, wrote 14 articles. Only 4 articles were mentioned. Totally, he published 14 articles in Russian, Thai, and English languages, 4 of which were published in the peer-reviewed journals from the Ministry of Science and Education list. So the thesis is an independent, complete, and unique paper, History and Journalism. The author has demonstrated excellent professional skills, research skills, ability to address complex issues, and the tasks he has set, as I think he managed to achieve, and his conclusions are well validated. I think that the thesis by Palahan Nattanop on Soviet media propaganda in the Kingdom of Thailand complies with the requirement applied to candidates' thesis, and its author deserves awarding the degree. But of course, the decision is yours, dear council members. Thank you. Ludmila Petrovna, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, Is anybody else willing to speak? Any of the council members or any of the attendees? Nobody's willing to speak, I think. Then, at that, I declare the discussion closed. Before the final voting, let me ask the council members: do council members or the applicant have any questions or comments regarding the procedure of the session, especially connected with the remote access mode? Questions? I don't have any. No, I see no questions. Thank you very much. Let's proceed to the next item as voting. Dear colleagues, dear council members, I have a question for the council members. Before we vote, we can take a break to discuss the results, and the sound shall be switched off. What do you think? Do we need such a break to discuss the results of today's defense? No, I think we don't need any break. Don't need a break. No, we don't need a break. Thank you. I see. So we won't take a break. I also agree. Dear colleagues, let's continue our session. Please check that we all can see and hear each other. Yes, we can see and hear each other. I have to state the time. Moscow time is 13:55 hours. Let us continue. We can all see and hear each other. I put the question of awarding to Palahan Nattanop the degree of Candidate of Philology, Specialty 599, Media Communications and Journalism, to the open individual voting. Let me emphasize that by voting for, each council member agrees that Article 11 of the order has not been violated by the author. Let me quote it. Article 11. In his thesis, the applicant for a degree shall be obliged to refer to the author and or source of materials or results when using in the thesis the results of scientific work personally performed by the applicant or co-authored by the applicant shall be obliged to mention this in the thesis. Let me remind you that a decision of the Dissertation Council on awarding the degree shall be considered positive if at least not less than a half, but at least 3 council members voted for it present at the meeting according to Article 23 of the order. Well, let's proceed to voting. Labush Nikolai Sergeyevich, council member, your opinion, please. Deserves awarding the degree. Thank you, Nikolai Sergeyevich. Council member Melnik Galina Sergeyevna, your opinion? I vote for awarding the degree. Thank you, Council member Tsvetova Natalia Sergeyevna. I support the thesis and I vote for awarding the degree. Thank you, Natalia Sergeyevna. Council member Katilenets Elena Anatolyevna. I support and I vote for. Council member Ospanova Aigerim Nuralivna, your opinion, please. I vote for. The chairman, thank you. Aigerim Nuralina, me, Chairman, Ms. Ontnikas, Boris Yakovlevich, also support and vote for. Let me count the votes. Everything is obvious. Thus, dear colleagues and guests, let me inform you that out of 6 council members present, 6 voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained. The decision to award to Palahan Nattanop the degree of candidate of the philological the specialty 599 media communication journalist has been made. Let's give the floor to the applicant for his closing remarks. Dear council members, dear guests, dear friends, today is a very important day. It's impossible to describe. Words cannot describe it. But first of all, let me thank all of you, all the council members, for your reviews, for your opinions, for your views of my work. This feedback is extremely useful for me, and now and in the future. I am very happy that all of you in such detail and very carefully have studied my work. This is very important for me. Also, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank my beloved supervisor Ludmila Petrovna. You are like my academic mother, like a mother to me. I thank you for your careful support you have given to me, and I am sure that you will support me in the future. Thank you very much, of course, for your remarks. We had conflicts and arguments, as a matter of fact, and good relations, and the relations between the thesis supervisor, and I thank you very much for your warm attitude which you have always had during the recent years. Thank you very much. Also, I'd like to thank, of course, external reviewers, Nachivan and whose reviews. She's very busy, but in fact she's very important figure in Thailand. She's like a scientific advisor for me, and she is very active in the Royal Academy of Sciences. Dear friends, today I have, not me, but all of us, we have many friends here. I thank you for your support, for your constant support, which you provided, especially today. We have so in 2 weeks, there'll be 2 more. So thank you for taking part in this defense. This is, of course, I thank you thank our university, which organized such not only very warm and the defense, very open and very detailed thesis. And in fact, I'd like to say that your efforts are very valuable. I'm quoting Galina Sergeyevna. I'm quoting Galina Sergeyevna. I'm quoting Nikolai Sergeyevich, and I thank all of you, dear friends. I'd like to thank my family in Thailand, who have always supported me, and of course will support me in the future in this road. And I promise that this is not the last day I'm speaking Russian. This is not the last day. I'm going to speak Russian. I know this language, and I promise that I will continue working and to improve my Russian and to promote the Thai language in Russia. Thank you very much, everybody, for your attention. Thank you very much. Thank you. Dear colleagues, let me thank all the participants of today's session. First of all the council members, and let me sincerely congratulate the applicant with such excellent defense and wish him good luck, health and well-being, and good luck with his further research. Thank you. I declare the session closed. Please stop broadcasting. Thank you.